And with that, it's my absolute honor to introduce Andrea Owen to you today, who will be helping us learn the 4 steps of shame resilience. Andrea Owen is an author, global speaker, and professional certified life coach who helps high-achieving women maximize unshakable confidence and master resilience. She has taught hundreds of thousands of women tools and strategies to be able to empower themselves to live their most kick-ass life through speaking, her books, coaching, and her wildly popular podcast with over 3 million downloads. She is a proud author of How to Stop Feeling Like Shit, 14 Habits That Are Holding You Back from Happiness, 52 Ways to Live a Kick-Ass Life, BS-Free Wisdom to Ignite Your Inner Badass and Live the Life You Deserve, and her latest book, Make Some Noise, Speak Your Mind and Own Your Strength, which just came out in August 2021. Andrea is a certified professional coactive coach from the Coaches Training Institute, a professional certified coach with the International Coaching Federation, a She Recovers coach, as well as a certified Daring Way facilitator, a modality based on the research of Dr. Brené Brown. When she's not juggling her full coaching practice or writing books, Andrea is busy riding her Peloton bike, chasing her 2 school-age children, or making out with her husband, Jason. She is also a retired roller derby player, having skated under the name Veronica Vane. Learn more about Andrea, AndreaOwen.com, as well as Facebook.com/HeyAndreaOwen and Instagram.com/HeyAndreaOwen. We are so delighted to have you, Andrea. Please take it away and share your screen when you feel the need to. Thank you.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you. And I need to update my bio. We were talking about this a little bit before, and I'm Hey Andrea Owen on TikTok as well. It's a very fun
we'll put
medium.
that in the chat so everyone can find you on TikTok, and I can just verify that her TikToks are awesome.
It's probably my favorite social media medium. Don't tell Instagram I said that, but it is. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm honored to be the first Mental Health Monday host of 2022. And I am going to share my screen for a little bit, and then I am going to turn it off, and then I'm going to turn it back on again. I'm not heavy on the slides. And I do encourage you all to take notes. I'm going to walk you through a 4-step process that is based on the Daring Way method that I facilitate in groups and retreats and one-on-one. And it's a much longer, it's done in an entire weekend, all 12 modules. But what I am going to teach you, these 4 steps, is sort of the whole thing distilled down, if you will, and definitely take notes. And I'm going to highlight, you'll see the highlights here on the slides that are the things I encourage you to write down. So first and foremost, why, when they asked me to come and host Mental Health Monday, did I immediately say, okay, the topic that I'm going to talk to you all about is shame resilience? Why did I choose that particular topic when I could have talked to you about confidence? I could have talked to you about boundaries, a whole slew of things up my sleeve. And I believe that shame resilience is so important to learn because addiction is a shame-based disorder. I lean heavily on the work of not only Dr. Brené Brown, but Dr. Gabor Mate, for those of you who are familiar with his work. I describe him as the Brené Brown of recovery. I just made that up a few days ago, and I'm like, I feel like he's kind of the Brené Brown of recovery. But I love the way that he talks about it. And I love the way that he talks about how to recover. His teachings and his findings over decades of working with people in deep addictions. I find his work just brilliant. And he talks about how addiction is a shame-based disorder, and we are addicted because we are ashamed. And then we become ashamed because we are addicted. And it becomes this vicious cycle that if we don't try to seek support, then it can just be never ending. The other thing I wanted to mention about just addiction is, I wanted to make sure that I didn't need to show you any more slides. Okay, stop sharing. Here we go. I'm back. Is that shame is universal. It's one of those things that we all have. And when I first started talking about this, so I got my certification in Brené's methodology in 2014. And one of the questions I heard from the women in my community was, I love Brené's work and I love that you're talking about this, but I don't walk around feeling ashamed. Can you talk about that? And like, sure, I don't walk around feeling ashamed either. I have moments of it. I'm going to share a couple of personal examples with you as I'm talking. But anytime we are engaging in our addiction, we're in shame, but also anytime we are participating in behaviors like perfectionism or people pleasing, or even, hyper independence and overachieving, we are doing so to avoid shame. So shame is essentially running the show. It's in charge of our life. That's one of the reasons I think it's so important to do this. The other thing that I believe learning shame resilience, the reason it's so important is because it's part of the human experience. It's a feeling and emotion and experience like all of the others. We can't make it go away. We can learn how to walk through it easier. We can become more resilient to it, but we can't figure out, I mean, trust me, if there was a way to hack into that and just like not experience shame anymore, like here's all my money. Sign me up. But it's a normal human affect that we're going to face. We have in the past, and we are going to have more moments where we do that. I'm going to take my earring off because it's bouncing against my thing here and it's bugging me. Okay. So what happens if we stay in shame? We know that I'm sure that you guys could tell me if I just threw this out there, and you can type in the chat. What happens if you feel shame? For those of you that have the self-awareness that you do feel it, not everyone does. It's kind of like in hindsight. But when we stay in shame, what can end up happening? I'm sure a lot of us will end up staying in our active addiction. If we've been sober for any period of time, we could relapse. Even at best, it will talk us into isolating and not talking about our feelings. And I see things popping out on the chat. Yes, someone said numbing. Absolutely. It is one of those things that if we don't kind of get a hold of it as quickly as possible, it can lead to behaviors that we do not want to have happen in our life that are unhealthy. There's also research tells us that there's a higher correlation if we spend a lot of time in shame. I don't know if you've ever heard Brené Brown talk about the difference between people who are guilt prone and people who are more shame prone. The guilt prone people tend to understand that when they make a mistake, that it's more focused on the behavior, the mistake that they actually made. Whereas shame prone people tend to think that they are a bad person, that they are fundamentally flawed, that there is something wrong with them, that they are broken. Right. I'm sure some of you, I'm raising my hand because I have found myself to be a more shame prone person, but through this work have sort of veered over into the lane of being more guilt prone and understanding that it's the behavior, not who I am as a person. I'm looking at my notes over here if you see me looking down, just to make sure I don't miss anything. And as I mentioned before, shame is the birthplace of perfectionism. It is the birthplace of people pleasing, proving, isolating. Your negative self-talk is based in shame. So obviously, I don't even think I needed to sell it to you all. You all know how important learning shame resilience is. And what does this have to do with recovery? Well, it has everything to do with recovery, because if we stay in shame or we fall into shame and we don't manage it, we don't practice shame resilience, we're more likely to relapse, or we're more likely to have thoughts that could lead us to relapse. And even if we don't relapse, even if we're not drinking, even if we're not using, even if we're not participating in the behavior that we're recovering from, we can still be in that unhealthy thought process. And that doesn't feel good. That feels like absolute crap. Right? Like nobody wants to be in that place where they're feeling that muck, that full body emotion of feeling ashamed. All right. So I'm going to tell you a quick story, a personal example, so that I can use this example as I talk to you about the 4 steps of shame resilience. I'm going to circle back to how I handled this particular example at the very end. So we relocated. By we, I mean myself and my children and my husband. we relocated to the state of North Carolina about 7 years ago. And my son was going to be in first grade and my daughter was in preschool, but my son was starting first grade and he also has an IEP. It's a special needs paperwork that I had to have a meeting with the principal of this brand new school, his first grade teacher, and he hadn't started yet. So I didn't know any of these people. The principal of the school, his first grade teacher, and what is called his case manager. It's the special education person who helps with the special ed kids. And the meeting's about to start and we're standing right outside of the conference room. And the case manager was very pregnant. And so we were talking about her pregnancy, just small talk as you get to know people. And I was also feeling vulnerable because if any of you moved to a new neighborhood or state, I mean, we had moved across the state. I knew no, I take that back. I knew my realtor. That was it. We knew one person. And I wouldn't even consider her a friend because she was my realtor. And so I was also feeling vulnerable, like, can we be friends? You're sort of like doing that awkward dance of wanting to put yourself in a light where people like you and you're looked at as like, oh, she seems like a legit mom. And we go into the meeting and they have his paperwork from his previous school that they had requested it and they sent over all of his records. That's how it works. And one of the papers was the psychiatric evaluation that my son had gotten a year or two previously. And when you have those psychiatric evaluations, they ask you the health history of the person's family, of the student's family. And so my information was on there. And I don't want to throw the psychiatrist under the bus because she had asked me, she's like, here's his paperwork. Do you want a copy of this without your health history in it? And I was like, why would I need that? No, it's fine the way it is. And I dismissed it. Now I know why she asked me if I wanted a copy of it without my information on it. So the first grade teacher is reading and she says, Colton lives at home with his father, his mother, and his sister. He is 6 years old. His mother has a history of substance abuse. And I just got goosebumps, you guys, when that came out of my mouth. This happened so long ago. I immediately felt, and then she kept reading, his mother has a history of substance abuse. Nothing in there talked about my sobriety. His mother has a history of substance abuse. And then I forget. And then I think it started immediately going into my son's symptoms and his diagnosis. And she read all of this without missing a beat. And there were no gasps in the room. Like nobody jerked their head up, but me, all the blood drained from my face. I immediately had that tunnel vision. My armpit started tingling. My mouth got dry. That immediate feeling of run, get out of here. Just so ashamed in that moment. And then also my racing thoughts of, oh my God, do they still think that I drink? Do they probably think I'm a drunk and now they're going to know. And the first grade teacher is going to know. And now nobody's going to want to have play dates with my kids and just on and on and on. Okay. I'm going to come back to that story in just a minute because I'm going to jump into it. So here are the 4 steps of shame resilience. And again, this is where I would love for you to take notes. So step 1, I don't know if you guys can see, I'm just going to shut that off. Okay. I hope you can see everything. I kept it very simple for you. Step 1 is to know that we're in it. Know that we're in shame. And I know this might sound a little bit of a no-brainer, but I have determined by talking to a lot of people about this, that sometimes we don't know. Maybe it's because it is something that has happened so many times, or it's shame is one of those full contact emotions where everything feels like it's in slow motion, but it's also happening so fast. And we don't have the ability to have that critical awareness yet of what is happening. This is why this part is so important. You have to know that you're in it. Okay. And I'm going to get to why. So you heard me talk about what was happening to my body. When we do this in a weekend, there's this little worksheet, and you can even draw this on your page if you're taking notes. And if you're watching this or you're listening to this while you're driving, I encourage you to go back, and when you can do this work, when you can write things down. There's like a gingerbread person, and it's blank. It's just an outline of a gingerbread person. And as a facilitator, we ask everyone to draw what happens to your body when you're in shame, because there are some similarities that are universal with shame symptoms, but you'll know if you think of something that happened to you, or if you think of, even like, put yourself in my shoes in that scenario, in that conference room with those people I had just met who I was hoping might be my friends, and suddenly the secret's out and my armpits tingle. I also, sometimes I get a stomach ache and I feel nauseous. I get also the overwhelming feeling of wanting to flee. Not only what happens to your body physiologically, but what happens to your thoughts. I want to caveat this quickly because some people tend to not have a running dialogue of thoughts in their mind. There's a name for it and I can't remember. It's a small percentage of people, and I think it's the coolest thing ever. It's like a fun fact about me type of thing. I have a running dialogue. Some people don't. And what they have is the more overwhelming feelings, and they can rely mostly on their physiological symptoms. But for those of you that do have like a running dialogue, thoughts actually articulated in your mind, what would happen in that moment? The example that I gave. One of the things I thought was, should I interrupt them? Should I jump in and say, I actually have, I think at the time I probably had like 3 or 4 years of sobriety. And like, I've been sober for several years. I'm in recovery and I'm good. Like, I don't drink anymore. By the way, it was just wine. It was just way too much wine at night. And that's what I would have done. I would have babbled on and on because I was in such a state of shame. Step 1 is to know that you're in it. And those two things are knowing what your physiological symptoms are in your body, as well as what happens to your thoughts. And I'm going to jump through these. I would love for you to take the time later on to really write these out. Think about, and please, if you need to do this with a therapist, please do this with a therapist or counselor or someone that you trust who can be a soft place to land, because this might be very difficult for you. That being said, if you find that you can get through it without support, I encourage you to do that. Think about something that's happened to you that was a shaming moment, whether it was, 10 years ago or whether it was 10 hours ago. And think about what happened to your body. Think about what happened to your thoughts. The next step is to know why you're in it. And this part right here of triggers and ideal identities, if I had a couple more hours, I would walk through that with you. But essentially, it is, if you can, know what your triggers are. The example that I just gave you is fairly obvious. My ideal identity is I want to be seen as a competent mother. I want to be seen as someone who has my life together, who does not have a past, a questionable past, a history of substance abuse, as it said on there. Like we all have these identities and that we want to be perceived by other people. I have an identity right now that I want to be perceived by all of you as. I want to be perceived as professional, as experienced, as someone who knows what she's talking about, who's credentialed, who's trained. And if something happens, even if it's a tech problem, even if my slides go to crap or I completely lose where I am susceptible to falling into shame because I am worried that I am going to be judged by all of you. Whether or not it's true that you're going to judge me or not, this is what our brains automatically do. So knowing your triggers, the things that can evoke shame, and knowing also what your ideal identities are, how you want to be perceived by other people, because that will tell you what your triggers are. And the practicing of critical awareness. This is what I mentioned before. It's reality checking the expectations that we have about ourselves and or others. So we all have these expectations. I had an expectation that I was going to go into this meeting and it was all going to go smoothly. I have expectations that I am going to show up and do this presentation flawlessly. We all have them, whether we know them or not. And step two, the knowing why you're in it. And I'm going to simplify this very much. So as I was sitting in that meeting with those women, my first thing that I went to was thinking about interrupting and telling them that I'm sober. Thinking like, would it be bad if I just shut the whole meeting down and walked out? But after that, and this all happened within 5 to 10 seconds. Right after that, I realized, oh my God, I'm in shame. And I knew it. And that's all I thought about. I don't have a long dialogue full of clinical jargon or anything like that. It was that simple. Oh my God, I'm in shame. And that's that critical awareness. That can be all it looks like. It does not have to be formal or long or this like check mark thing that you go through. Just checking yourself and knowing why you're in it. And the third step is, and these last two don't go in any particular order. The third step is to practice self-compassion. And I'm sure that, if any of you, if any of you have been doing this work long enough, you have heard about self-compassion. Maybe some of you have read Kristen Neff's book. It's called Self-Compassion, Kristen with the K, Neff. I believe hers is probably the best one I've read, the most comprehensive on self-compassion. And truly, self-compassion, from what I understand personally, as an educator on the topic, and even people who have studied this, talk about self-compassion as a lifelong learning process. And that is something we get right sometimes, and that we have to really work on it other times. For a lot of people, it depends on the area of their life. Maybe they're compassionate with themselves around their childhood trauma, but they're not as compassionate with themselves around their parenting or being a partner to someone. It really, truly depends. So I just want to make sure everyone is clear on that. Self-compassion typically is not a destination that we arrive at and then we're like, yes, I've got it. And just on a personal note, I am someone who grew up in a family where there was not a lot of compassion. There was a lot of judgment, and hardly any compassion. And I grew up to have zero compassion for myself. And it wasn't until I was well into adulthood, probably mid 30s, late 30s, I got sober when I was 37, that I learned to have compassion for myself. And I'll tell you what, sometimes it was a street fight with my inner mean girl that wanted to put her dukes up and say, no, if we have compassion, then we're going to turn into a loser. We're going to be a slacker. I'm going to be lazy. So I just wanted to say that on a personal note. Self-compassion and self-kindness is something that I still have to be diligent about and do that critical awareness that I was just talking about. Okay. And the last step, we're already almost at the end. Again, in no particular order, is empathy. And this is about sharing your story or your experience. And Brene Brown says it has to be the right story to the right person at the right time. Because when we're in shame, shame wants us to stay quiet and not share what just happened with anyone. And our inner dialogue we might feel like, we might say something like, this is so embarrassing. This is so humiliating, when really it's shame. I'm so ashamed about this. Like, I can't bear to tell anyone. No one's going to understand. I don't want to bother anyone. I don't want to be a burden. I can't bear to tell it. And shame will continue to grow. So I'm going to recap quickly. It is knowing that you are in it, listening to your thoughts, listening to your body. Step two is knowing why you're in it. What triggered it? What happened? that put you in that moment, that put you in that experience. Okay. And then the event happens. And then we go into self-compassion and hopefully empathy. And empathy is one of those things that I had to learn this in coach training. I had never seen that type of, I'll share this story with you. I shared this in one of my books. I believe it was my second one, How to Stop Feeling Like Shit. When I was in coach training, they put us to do exercise and they called it triads. It was a group of 3 people. And one of the women in the group, her husband had just had a diagnosis. He had bone cancer. And she was rightfully upset about it because it was very fresh. And she was sharing that with us and, was crying a little bit. And the other woman said something to the effect of, that has got to be so difficult what you're going through. I imagine your grief is insurmountable and the unknowing has to be probably one of the hardest things you've ever experienced. And y'all, when I tell you, I was like mouth open, like looking back and forth at these 2 women, like, what just took place here? Because if it were me, I would have been like, dang, that sucks. Okay, let's put together a strategy of self-care for you. Like, I would have been jumping to solution. At that time, this was very early on in my coach training, I could not be with those very difficult emotions because I could not be with those in myself. That's a side note. That's another talk for another time, which can be very common in people who struggle with addiction. Because a lot of times when we're active in our addiction, we are running away from whatever feelings are too difficult to bear. So empathy. Receiving empathy from someone else is easy for me to talk about to you, but it can be tricky in real life. When you are thinking about this, and you're thinking about the person in your life that might be able to be empathetic towards you, what I encourage people to do, and I write about this at length in my books, is to tell people how you want to be supported. I preface conversations with both my best friend and my husband, who are the 2 people I share the most sacred, dark parts of myself. I preface the conversation with what exactly it is that I need. Because if I don't get that, disappointed expectations on my end. And I'm sure we've all had those experiences where, and I'm laughing and it's not funny. And I'm thinking of my own personal experiences where we've gone to someone thinking that they were going to show up for us in the way that we needed to be taken care of and supported, and they didn't. And that can pull us farther into shame. So people don't know. People tend to not know. I don't want to make a sweeping generalization. People tend to not know how we need them to show up for us unless we tell them. And I also encourage you to do it, again, before you tell somebody something difficult. So I'm going to finish the rest of the story and what I ended up doing that afternoon after that meeting. So we finished the meeting and I was deeply uncomfortable. I was probably covered in hives and was in desperate need of a drink of water. And we left and I got back home, and I knew immediately that I needed to call one of my dear friends who's also in recovery, because she would be the person who would be a soft place to land. Because had I not told anyone, had I just been like, it's not that big of a deal. I have 3 years of sobriety. It was embarrassing and I'm a little ashamed, but it's not that big of a deal. Holding that in might not seem like it's that big of a deal, but these things sort of like they collect. They start to collect, and I look at it like a water balloon. And one poke from a pin in the water balloon isn't going to do a whole lot of damage. It's when you have a lot of pokes in the water balloon and it starts gushing, and that's when you have a problem, and that's when it's really hard to patch the thing back up. So patch it up from the get-go. And I called my dear friend Courtney and I told her what happened. And I got really emotional and started crying and didn't think that I was all that upset about it. And she just listened and said, honey, that sounds rough. I would have felt the exact same way that you do. And then we laughed about it because I have to have a sense of humor about hard things when the time is right. And then it was better. And now I'm able to come to you and share this story. But I think it's interesting that when I tell this story, I still have a physical reaction. All the hair stood up on my legs. So that's just one of the reasons I want to emphasize how important this is. So I'm gonna recap and go backwards if I know how to do this. I do. Step 1 is know that you're in it. Step 2 is know why you're in it. So that's your triggers and ideal identities and practicing critical awareness. Step 3 is practicing self-compassion, understanding that hard things that happen to you, it's common humanity. Hard things happen to everyone. Because when we're in shame, it can feel very lonely. It can feel like I am the only one that this has happened to. Nobody else has these types of problems. And also sharing your story and your experience with the right person.
So the first one is, I have a work addiction and shame is tied up in my career performance. Even when I'm doing well, I feel shame over any slight mistake and beat myself up for it. How can I break this shame cycle in the moment while working?
I would practice those steps. So I would definitely work on the self-compassion piece. And oh God, I have so many. I can't help but not be a coach. I have so many questions. um, I would be curious, and this is probably something to explore if she has a therapist or counselor. Where does this come from? Like it sounds like, and I don't mean to jump ahead or even project, but for me personally, when I got sober from codependence and love addiction 15 years ago, 14 or 15 years ago, almost immediately I traded that in for alcohol. And I was, how long was I active in my alcoholism? Just maybe 2 or 3 years before I realized that I needed to give that up too. And then also I have to be very careful about work. So what I do is I ask myself, what is it that I'm trying to either prove to myself, to the world, to whomever, or what is it that I'm trying to run away from? Or answer this question. And these can be journaling questions for any of you. I love the question if we're thinking about our addiction is what is the problem that I think fill in the blank will solve? What is the problem that I think drinking will solve? What is the problem that I think excelling at work is going to solve? I don't expect you to be able to answer that right off the top of your head, but typically these are related to some deep core belief that we have about ourselves and about the world. So mine is, I was just talking to my husband about this today. Mine is, and from a logical standpoint, like I know that this isn't true. And that's how, these old these trauma wounds manifest. Logically, I know it's not true, but my core belief is that nobody really cares about you, even though they say they do. You're not really that special. And I believe that that is one of the reasons I almost dug myself an early grave, graduating with honors from college when I had 2 babies and I had one in the oven when I graduated. It's the reason I have, written books and of course, like the bigger reason is that like I do it because I love it. And I do it because I know unequivocally that I'm talented and that I have so many amazing things to share. However, there is also a part of me that does it because I still identify as an addict and it pulls me out of feeling like nobody really cares about me. So again, I don't mean to project, but I hope that those questions help for you to be able to sort of like get to the root of it, because it's never about work. It's never about drinking. It's never about the food. It's never about the sex or whatever it is. It's about the trauma that we're trying to get away from. That's why I love She Recovers and says like, we're all recovering from something, because we are. And also the empathy piece. And hopefully you have someone who can be a soft place to land for you. Did I answer the question? You had a specific thing that she asked.
Yes, I think you answered it beautifully.
I tend to go off on tangents.
Nope, that's totally fine. And I think that was a wonderful answer. And yes, I think that's one of the things I like about She Recovers as well, because it's everything and it kind of gets to the root of whatever the behavior is or addiction that we're doing that doesn't serve us. And it's mostly stories we have about ourselves, like you said.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
awesome. So the next question is, I think this is more about your story that you were telling. This person said, I'm wondering how you were blindsided by the history in your son's report. How was the information included in his file and from where?
That's a good question. The way that it works, at least at this particular facility, is that it's a comprehensive, it's a booklet that we got when we had him tested. And my short answer is I'm not sure. It's just their practice, the way that they do things. But again, like I said, she did ask me if I wanted a separate file that did not contain the personal information about me. And again, when she asked me that, I wish she would have clarified and said, like, there's this part in here about and I'm my best friend calls me Miss Hasty. I have impulse control disorder. So which is great for entrepreneurship, terrible for drugs and alcohol, but I tend to like skim through things really fast. I think that's what happened. I just didn't notice it. And so yeah, I encourage anybody who is in that scenario to look and see HIPAA laws, if you want something taken out.
This person says, I have a lot of shame in regards to caring too much what people think about me. If I feel as though someone doesn't like or respect me, I go straight to a place of shame. It brings me down. I am aware of it while it's happening, yet I'm still affected by these feelings of shame regardless. Do you have any advice?
Ooh, that is a great one. I like to sort of pick and choose different sort of tools and strategies that the various experts in our industry provide us. And one of a leader in this field is Byron Katie. And I don't love the entire model. It's called, oh my gosh, can someone type in the chat? I know somebody knows what it is. Do what's here or something like that. And she has these 4 questions that the book is like right next to me in my bookshelf. The work.
I believe it's called The
Thank
Work.
you.
Yeah.
It's that simple. I knew it was something easy. The work. And the reason that I don't love it on a surface level is similar to why I don't love on a surface level the 4th step of the 12 steps, because if you take it out of context, you can be blaming yourself all day long for things that really aren't your responsibility. So that's another conversation for another time. Briefly, Byron Katie asks 4 questions, and it's when you have a certain thought. For instance, like if you have the thought, like, I don't think this person likes me. I don't think Kelly from She Recovers likes me very much. So you would pause in that moment and ask yourself, is this true? And I'm assuming that the person that asked this question, you can't be sure unless this person has looked you in the face and said, I don't like you, which doesn't happen very often. And by the way, that person needs to learn how to have more effective communication if they say things like that. But the first question is this true? And you answer. If you answer yes, then the next question is, can you be absolutely sure that this is true? And so sometimes just that is helpful for people. I've also heard the alternative of, is this thought helpful? Is this thought helpful to me? And then you can say, next question is, who would I be without this thought? Or what would happen if I didn't have this thought? And it's just sort of like, it's a little bit like cognitive behavioral therapy, slightly, how you're breaking down and kind of like picking at, and I need a better metaphor, like unraveling the thread on a sweater to get to the bottom of this particular thought. And then the last part is you have to kind of like look at yourself, which we don't need to get into now, but sometimes just breaking it down like that. And I have found, like, as somebody who was diagnosed with anxiety disorder in 2003, same girl, like I used to obsess about what people thought of me and then sit there for hours, like rewinding a conversation and like thinking about their body language and their shifty eyes and like, well, did that happen? And that happened. What helped me the most is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And that is something that I went through with my therapist, and that I think only a licensed professional can do, but it's similar to what I just described. It makes you slow way down and think about each thought as they happen. Because some of us just have those intrusive, impulsive thoughts.
Yes, I totally agree. I think thoughts are so powerful. And for a really long time, that statement kind of annoyed me because I was like, you can't just pick and choose your thoughts, right? But these tools like help us learn that you can analyze them and say, is this
Yep.
true? Does this serve me? How can I change it to be more true for myself? So I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so our next question is from someone on the Facebook page, and they said, Andrea, do you have recommended resources to help evaluate the right story, right person, right time step? I want to share my story more, but also want to keep myself safe.
Okay. That is such a great question. Thank you for asking it. Right story, right person, right time. When I teach that, here's what I think about. Start with the people that are the closest to you. And if you don't have someone that's close to you that you trust enough to tell your story, then I hope that you have someone who's a therapist or a counselor, or even BetterHelp has great options for people who might live in rural areas or haven't tried therapy yet, or just don't want to do it in person. There's so many great opportunities and resources out there now to be able to start to trust someone to tell that story to, and be upfront and tell them, I am having trouble feeling safe sharing my story. And I know it's part of the solution for shame resilience and just having more nurturing, loving relationships in my life. And you're sort of practicing on that person. I also encourage people to look at the existing relationships that you already have in your life and see if anyone has potential. And then use us as an entry point and say, I was on this webinar, or I was listening to this workshop, or I was listening to this podcast, or I saw this TikTok and they were talking about, and this is obviously somebody you would do with a friend that you have, not just somebody like you're sitting on the train with. I guess if you want, but I don't recommend it. I heard this woman talking, and she was talking about sharing your story. And I feel like you might be that person for me. And I know that this might seem really awkward and like, do you want to take our relationship to the next level? Like, you can find some humor in it. And just like, I like to say what's there. It's like, if it's an awkward conversation, say it's an awkward conversation, and just see if that person would be up for it. You might be surprised. And I am going to acknowledge how vulnerable that really is. That is truly vulnerable. That in and of itself is going to take a lot of courage for you to come out and ask an existing friend, how do you feel about being my person that I share this story with? I also encourage people to start small. And, you don't have to start with your deepest, darkest secrets. It could be something like, what's the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to you? Because a lot of times, I'm going to be honest, a lot of times when we describe something as embarrassing, it was actually a shaming moment. We typically don't say, oh, this happened to me and I was so ashamed. We usually say, like, it was so embarrassing. I was so embarrassed at the moment. And that can be sort of an entry point. And I will tell you that I want to say this one last thing. It's not always going to work out. And maybe you'll get shot down. Maybe someone, I tell this story sometimes. I have a friend, we're actually still friends, and we've gotten closer since then. But a couple of years ago, John Gottman teaches us that shame is built in small increments over time. So it's sort of like, you share something small with me, and then I share something small with you, and then it keeps going back and forth. And then you remember to get me a card on my birthday and you write something nice in it. And then I remember that you told me you had a doctor's appointment, and I check in with you that day to see how your mammogram went. So like, these are these small increments of trust that happen over time. And so I had this friend, and I felt like we were kind of in that groove where we had shared things back and forth and shared hard things about parenting and shared hard things about our marriage. And I was telling her this story, and it was a little bit of a level up, this really hard thing I was telling her. And the look on her face, y'all, this look where her eyes just got like slightly bigger. And she even like took a step, like a half step backwards. And, for those of us that can read body language really well and social cues, like we know, like, and then I was already in it. I was in the story, and I'm like, do I just stop like halfway? Do I just keep telling the story? And I'm just like flooded, like, oh my God, what have I done? And, Brene Brown calls that the vulnerability hangover, when we've shared something too quick with the wrong person at the wrong time. But I thought it was the right person, the right story at the right time. So and that also doesn't mean that you can't come back from that. You can. And friendships are awkward. Relationships are awkward. They're so awkward. And I just want to encourage you, like, if you don't get it right the first time, just acknowledge it in yourself. Give yourself loads of self-compassion and try again. If you get knocked down, which you will, keep trying again and keep just acknowledging the feelings that are coming up for you. End of rant.
Awesome. Yes. Ugh, so true. So true. I think relationships are, hard. So it can be, like you said, vulnerable to ask someone to show up for us, and also really important. So,
yeah.
Okay. So our next question comes with a little bit of a trigger warning. It's about a sexual encounter and pressure. And it says, I have a lot of shame about a recent sexual encounter I had that was consensual in the moment, but he pressured me into spending time with him late at night when I said at least 3 times I was not feeling up to it. I feel that I gave into this pressure because I was in a vulnerable spot after having a breakup recently and having a big argument with my dad. I don't even know how to approach this shame. It feels very deep-seated. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes. And first, I want to acknowledge a couple of things. I just want to acknowledge you for asking the question. I'm just incredibly honored to be given the space to help you in this moment. And that's tricky and hard too, because I feel like for women, and I'm going to speak generally here, for people who identify as women, and especially people who grew up identifying as girls, and then young women in our culture, we are taught that we are to, put everybody before us, especially men, that their comfort comes before ours, especially when it comes to sexual encounters. And so I think that it can be, for many people, it can be a long, like we can have these conversations with the other women in our life, and just, like fist pump and like, yes, like, let's put our pleasure first. Let's have these conversations about consent and how important it is. But then when we actually are alone with someone, sometimes we revert back to these old patriarchal habits that have been ingrained in us from when we were very, very small. So I want to just acknowledge that it's a challenging thing to unlearn that. And I mean, I'm approaching 50, and still there is stuff that I'm having to unlearn. I was watching a talk from Dr. Gabor Mate, who I mentioned earlier, and he was essentially, it was kind of like a therapy moment. He had a man from the audience who had come up. He was talking to a bunch of therapists, and it was continuing education. And he invited the man up, and the man shared something kind of similar. It was an unwanted sexual encounter that this man had. And he said that he regretted not saying, get off me. And what I found was so moving that Dr. Gabor, or that Dr. Mate said, and that I have taken with me and I have never forgotten, and is that he said, did you feel like those words were kind of stuck either in your body or in your throat? And do you have shame for not saying that? And he said, yes. And what he explained is that what Dr. Mate explained was that in those moments, whether, and this particular man was a small child that happened to, but I think for women who are of a certain age, even, we have these old programs that are still running through our mind. And we go into a kind of like traumatic experience, and we go into that where our parasympathetic nervous system takes over, and it's that fight, flight, or freeze. And that's what happened to that man that he was talking about. And Dr. Mate said, if you had the ability, if your body had the ability to say that out loud and to protect yourself, you would have, and you didn't. And it's not your fault that you did not have the ability in that moment. And you did your best in that moment. You did. And I think that's the same for you. The person that asked this question is you did your best in that moment. And this is what I see happens when we're in this learning place, when we're in recovery and we're learning how to show up more courageously in our lives. And we learn the tools and we walk away and we feel empowered. And then when we get into a situation when we could use the tools, we don't use the tools. And then we beat ourselves up about it because we didn't. And what I always tell people is the way that it usually works is that you learn the tools in a workshop or from a book or from a podcast or from a mental health Monday. And then you go about your real life and you are in a situation where you can use your tools and you see it happening right in front of you and you don't use your tools. That's part of the process. As infuriating as that might feel, that's part of the process. That's that critical awareness. And so the next time it happens, you can kind of see it coming a little bit faster, if that makes any sense. And you're like, I've been in this place before. I know what the tools are. And hopefully whatever is stuck in your body or in your throat will actually come out. And you might need to be in that place where you don't practice the tools 10 times. And my hope is that you have a fierce amount of self-compassion, that you can talk to someone and talk through it and maybe make a plan to be able to say the thing next time, or even have a scenario. This would probably be done with a therapist. Have a scenario where you get to replay that and either say or do what you wish that you would have done in that situation. That could be very cathartic. And then hopefully the next time that you're in a position like that, a vulnerable position, then you will actually implement the tools. Big hugs to you. Consensual hugs.
Wow. I just want to say thank you for acknowledging that in the way that you did and offering that advice from Dr. Mate, because I've also been in a similar situation and that was really validating for me too. So I really appreciate it. And I'm sure the person that asked that question does too. So we have one more question to wrap up our Q&A, and it came from Facebook, and it is, I have a hard time with shame resilience while going through several court dates, fighting for my parental rights of my children. The system has a way of making you feel like an awful person over and over again. Any advice?
Yeah. Oh, that is rough. The system. I think this is your work. Like, this is one of those things where it is one of those glaring examples. I'm going to say the F word here real quick. So earmuffs for those who don't like it, but I talked about this in one of my books. Have you guys heard the term AFGO, AFGO, another fucking growth opportunity? Like, this is your AFGO. And I encourage you to, like, you already, steps 1 and 2, you already are there. You know that you're in shame and you know why you're in it, because the system does its best to make you look like a bad parent, to make you look like you're neglectful, to point out any former addictions or poor behaviors that you had. you already know that you're in it. So the other two steps, and of course, the last two don't go in any particular order, is self-compassion and empathy. So your self-compassion might look like, yes, I made mistakes in the past. And when I was active in my addiction, I was doing the best I could with the tools that I had, which I think we can all attest to. At one time in our life, our best was crap. Our best was complete crap. We probably know a lot of people whose best is still complete crap. And all we can do is get up every day and, like Glennon Doyle says, like, do the next right things, like do the next right thing for us, for our children, for whatever it is. So it's that understanding that, again, like I was just talking about when I answered the woman's previous question of, like, if you would have been able to do better, if you would have been able to stay sober, if you would have been able to beat the addiction, you would have done it. You would have done it. And the thing, I mean, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of like addiction and how we are trying to solve a problem with behaviors or substances that have nothing to do with the primary problem. And the problem is trauma, is that we're trying to help wounds that need to be healed. And that's what you were trying to do. And this is not to condone any behavior, that any of us are trying to recover from, but truly we did the best that we could with the tools that we had. And I cannot emphasize that enough. So my short answer is practice self-compassion, and hopefully you have someone, I hope that it's someone in recovery, because anytime you talk to somebody in recovery, they understand completely. And hopefully they can offer you empathy and just see you in your shame, see you in your struggle, in your pain, and any of the other things that you're feeling.
Thank you. Great.
Thank
So that
you.
was our last question. Thank you so much, everyone. And special thank you to you, Andrea, so for your time, for your heart, for your experience. Thank you to those who make this series possible. And most importantly, thank you to all of our viewers for showing up today, holding space, and bringing forward your questions. We truly are stronger together. Next Monday, we have our very own Mama Dawn Nickel, who will be talking about the respectable addiction, workaholism. To learn more about Mental Health Monday and all of our upcoming sessions, please visit sherecovers.org/mental health Mondays. For more information about She Recovers Foundation and all of our recovery-focused programs, resources, and touch points, please visit sherecovers.org.